Okay, well, welcome everybody, and thank you to the esteemed panel you see on the screen. One Nucleus as a membership group, one of the big drivers for us is how do we provoke questions and bring new ideas and thought processes to our ecosystem and our membership group about how we can collectively do things better, whether that's in research, whether it's in funding mechanisms and deals, or indeed whether it's in growing companies. And I think an aspect that I'm conscious we don't talk about that often. We spend a lot of time talking about how do you grow a biotech company that raises lots of venture capital. And we see this in other sectors, but actually the contract research space is the glue that holds all these things together often, and is growing just as rapidly, if not quicker, quite often with the way the sector now works in partnership and outsourcing. And I think it is partnership more than outsourcing. It's just the deal structure that people end up debating rather than it is an intellectual collaboration by any means. And one of the benefits of doing digital conferences is that you can get people from different parts of the world to be on the same panel without them having to fly for hours and think, do I really want to do this? So from the comfort of our own offices or homes, we get the chance to bounce some ideas around from people with very different backdrops to their own ecosystems and challenges. So I'm delighted to have the panel here today. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, because I'm sure they'll do it in a far more articulate way than I can. And so for me, as Tony Jones, as Chief Exec of One Nucleus, I'm delighted to be with this group. And perhaps I can come to Karen first to introduce yourself and maybe give your slant on what you think is working well.
Thank you, and nice to be here. Thank you for the invite. So my name is Karen Williams. I'm a Director of Operations for Early Discovery for Charles River, based in the UK. We've got multiple sites in the UK, so we have an unusual challenge of having to operate multiple sites and stay connected. It's fantastic being a CRO. I've been with Charles River now for just next week is my 19th anniversary of being with the organisation, and it's very dynamic. And I think part of I feel my role in an operational role is to try and encourage people to come into the CROs from biotech and pharma, because it's a fast-moving, highly engaging, and a very dynamic workspace. And it'd be great to talk a little bit more today about what some of the challenges and opportunities are of working in CROs.
Thanks, Karen. Maybe I'll come to Miranda next.
Hi everyone, I'm Miranda Nags and I'm Corporate Development Director for We Are Pioneer Group, which was founded in April of this year following the acquisition of BioCity Group by Harrison Street, which is a US real estate capital firm, and by Trinity Investment Management. We're a hybrid model of an incubator, an accelerator program, and an investor. So we now have a portfolio of 12 science parks, 9 different locations across the UK, with about 2.6 million square foot of laboratories and offices, housing over 600 companies. We run accelerators programs across the UK. We have our own small investment fund, and we have a big focus on life sciences. And we're really proud that we house probably the majority of the small CROs across the UK on our incubator sites. And we've seen some grow from being 2-person-based companies up to 400-person-based companies, and all the challenges and opportunities that come from that. So I feel that it's a real exciting sector to be part of, and I really do feel like the CROs are the backbone of the life sciences industry.
Thanks, Miranda. And Jim.
Sure, so thanks. I'm Jim McNeal. I'm Chief Scientific Officer for Bioagiletics. We're a large molecule bioanalytical CRO that performs and generates custom assays to support preclinical and clinical trials. We have 3 sites globally, so Durham, North Carolina, Boston, Massachusetts, which is where I am, and in Hamburg, Germany. I think interestingly, and I love where Karen started us off speaking about this. My background is actually in biotech and pharma. I've been with Bioagiletics just over a year now, but 20 years in various sizes, from small startup companies all the way up to Pfizer. So, you know, I've kind of seen it from both sides. I do think there's a huge opportunity to recruit people from that space into the CRO space through some of the intellectual challenges, the scientific things that we get to do, and the breadth of experience that you gain in a CRO. So really happy to be part of the panel today, and excited to have the discussion. So thanks so much.
Excellent. I think what really struck me from there, and I think, you know, you sort of loop back to it, Jim, was this attracting people into the CRO space. Because I guess for a long time, you know, if you spoke to a fresh graduate or PhD, it's like, oh, I'm going to work in biotech and pharma, not the contract research space. But I'm sort of getting the impression that kind of image, I wouldn't say it's an image crisis, but that kind of image of, I want to be in the primary R&D space, and they saw the contract as somewhere they, I don't know, more boring, I guess, or whatever they saw it as from a relatively uninformed view. Is that changing now, do you think, in terms of perception? I'll come to Jim, maybe.
I think so. I can obviously speak for myself. You know, I kind of came around to the idea of being part of a CRO. In my role in biotech and pharma, I was kind of working for internal CROs as part of it anyway, doing some of that work. But I do think that certainly we're seeing at Bioagiletics a lot of people that have been in smaller biotechs, maybe, and are looking for career growth and really looking for a broader sort of scientific experience. And when I pull on sort of what happened through my career, as I was in smaller biotech companies, well, maybe we had 1 or 2 drug candidates and we were working on bringing those forward. Well, at Bioagiletics, I'm working on, you know, literally 20, 50 different candidates that are all going simultaneously, different drug indications, different disease indications, different drug modalities, just all these things. So I'm a huge advocate of actually new people, young people, just coming out with their degrees to go get the broad experience first and pull them in. And we're doing that, I think, to some extent. We could get better at it for sure. We'd love to get better at it. But I think there's a real case to be made that you just need to get it sold right to them. Why go work on 1 drug and 1 disease? Come work on 20 at the same time, you know, learn a lot.
Well, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? The ones that feel initially maybe not going to stay in the lab, they're going to go into venture capital, and it's a portfolio game and take lots of bets. And what you've just described is actually doing that, but in research. So why would you tie yourself on 1 bet? It's, you know, and I guess, Karen, you said, you know, was it 19 years now you've been with Charles? So you were like a trendsetter at this point, where you were going into.
Yeah, I mean, I had to make a conscious decision when, you know, I was probably, you know, 6, 7 years into my career and looking for something new, and kind of wanted to explore what the CRO world looked like, and very fortunate to be offered a position. And I've seen it grow. I mean, in the early days, I'd agree with you. I think that it used to be kind of like the second-rate sort of position compared to pharma. But these days, that is just not the case. I mean, we attract people straight from their university studies. We're attracting people just like Jim, who's moved roles recently. We're attracting people from big pharma companies into our organization. And it's about the learning opportunities, exactly as Jim was saying. It's the breadth of knowledge people can pick up really quickly. But the science that we do is broad, multiple modalities. You know, historically, drug discovery, certainly in the CRO world, was more focused on sort of small molecule progression through the cascade. So we can, certainly in early discovery for Charles River, we take compounds from sort of concept through to that preclinical candidate phase before it goes into development. And people see that we work with a multitude of different clients across the world. So you learn to work with different cultures, different organizations have different styles. So not only do you learn incredible science, but you learn a lot about project management, what's important from screening cascades. you get a feeling for what's historically hurt compounds before, companies before with compounds going into clinical trials. But now I think there's an absolute revolution in new modalities. We're moving away from the small molecule, and Charles River has got a huge track record in acquisitions. So moving now into the cell and gene therapies and the larger molecule space is really exciting. So there's always opportunity to keep learning and growing, and I think that is absolutely vital. You know, and it's also testament, you don't really want to say this out loud too much, but you know, we do get pharma companies poaching our well-trained staff these days, which is testament to the training ground we have for our staff.
Which I guess is kind of flipping things around, really, I guess, because a lot of the time you saw people come out of pharma, and that's where the expertise was coming into the CRO when pharma were restructuring. And I guess, Miranda, I've known you for a few years now, I guess, and you know, we've often seen how companies you've helped incubate and start have actually been teams that have come out of part of that pharma restructuring and started their own CRO business, doing what they were doing before, but on a different business model. So I guess you've seen it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's why Nottingham was so successful so quickly. For example, you know, when AstraZeneca closed its site in Loughborough, all the cream of the crop who worked on that site came to set up as CROs on the Nottingham site. So, you know, Simon Hurst of Signature and Richard Weaver of Xenogesis, etc. And we've seen, you know, the fantastic success that these, you know, companies have had. And I think it was because they've had that excellent grounding in big pharma. They came with the networks already as soon as they started, and yeah, they just flew, having that, you know, fantastic background, I think, in pharma. But if you ask them all, I think they all prefer to be in a CRO now.
but you know, so it's that sort of interesting part where I've been in many discussions, I guess, or observed them around policies, around skills and trades. You know, what happens when pharma stops training people? And now it's hearing the training and that learning and development happening in the CRO space, and then they're going into pharma, because everything I used to hear was, you know, people coming in, the graduates don't have enough project management skills, which actually within a CRO, project management is right up there. It has to be. And maybe that brings a different sort of training and grounding in that environment, I guess, to take back. And I suppose so that's sort of the people side of it. But again, you know, nothing grows in a sort of a vacuum or without labs, particularly in our field. So, you know, so how, in terms of other key factors of allowing a CRO to scale, what does that ecosystem need? How do you provide the lab space it needs? Maybe I'll come to you first, Miranda, given we are Pioneer Group, have, what was it, 600 companies now that you look after and accommodate. But how do you create the right sort of space under the right terms of leasing and these sorts of things, the challenges for a growing CRO?
Well, I think there are several factors really, and I think some of them are, you know, we've got great CROs and startups all collaborating with each other already on our site, so that's definitely a good thing. But I also think we make a conscious effort to work really hard with key stakeholders in the regions we operate in to have a unified agreement on what areas of innovation we should prioritize as a group. So it's about working with the universities, local government, trade associations, and you know, we ourselves as the incubator is all getting behind the idea of being part of a larger network, but also understanding our, you know, individual roles we play in our respective organizations to make the CROs successful. So for me, I think it's about not necessarily about the quantity of resources available to CROs and startups in our different locations, but it's about how those resources are coordinated, how easily they can access them, and about being connected, I suppose, and feeling part of something bigger to make them more successful. So I think there's all that, as well as obviously looking at excellent facilities and talented young scientists, that, you know, how they're going to recruit, how are they going to, you know, access markets, i.e. the customers, what's the region's international business relations, what's the maturity of the ecosystem, what's available as incentives from government, what's the level of startups, how flexible are your leases, how big are your spaces, do you have write-up areas, do you have GMP facilities, you know, all sorts of things that come into that question, really, of, you know, why they will start in a certain location over another.
And I guess that sort of is, you know, let me throw it to you a little bit, Jim. I think in that sense, you know, from here, and, you know, we looked with envy at times of saying about that whole ecosystem that's around the other Cambridge. But obviously you're in 3 different locations, and, you know, we never sort of hear much spoken about CROs when we think about the Boston hub. You know, all you see the headlines of the bio dollars being raised and discovery. But actually, you've got 3 kind of sites that you work across in that sense. You know, do you see much difference in those dynamics of how that plays out?
I think so. Originally, Bioagilitics was the mothership in Durham, North Carolina, and then acquired the sites in Boston and Durham. And over time, there's been a lot of harmonization. But really, over the past couple of years, we've seen, from an infrastructure standpoint, build out of laboratories, a shift towards more modular lab space so that it can accommodate the needs of today, but also be prepared for the needs of tomorrow. I think even 5 years ago, if people had thought, well, you're going to need these tools because we're going to be supporting cell and gene therapies, no one would have planned for that. But I think now we see how rapidly things are changing. The innovators are creating a demand for outsourced services that we have to be anticipating. So as Miranda mentioned, our scientists have to be tied into the network of scientists in the innovators to see where are they going so we can be prepared for them. And then from that infrastructure standpoint, making sure that we're modular enough and flexible enough to adapt to the rapidly changing times so that we can expand here and maybe scale back on this, but build out this part of it. It's just an amazing thing. And you're right, in the Boston area, it's always been challenging, I think, for CROs, it's specifically in Cambridge, just because of the high density of competition and things like real estate and the things that you never want to think about as a scientist that factor into it. But we've been very lucky to be part of it. And it's essential to be there with those innovators because they want to be able to have that real sort of face-to-face connection with you. So very lucky from that.
Yeah, and I guess similarly, when I kind of think about Charles River, Karen, you know, it's, you know, so much of the early discovery and preclinical stuff that now goes on in your labs, you need that real interface with those innovators coming in. So, I mean, Charles River's across loads of sites, you know, and locations. You know, do you see particular things you think, actually, you know, that would work? If we're going to scale this part of the activity, we should do it here compared to one of the other sites, and how you...
Absolutely, and I guess part of the beauty of being Charles River is the scale of it. So we must have now, you know, over 185 sites across the world. I mean, I work in just the early discovery piece, which is in the UK and Europe. But actually, we can leverage some of that knowledge and the sites and the connections we have across the globe. So it's, you know, there's always somebody, you know, at a different site. There's always someone where, you know, you can, in the old days when we were having face-to-face meetings, there's always the ability to travel to client sites. But we tend to work, historically, in the early days, we were more one site with multiple functions, but we're going more towards this sort of hub and spoke model now, where we'll have our central homes where our central sites are. But to reach the biohubs around the world, you know, there's the ones in San Francisco, in San Diego, there's Boston, there's main hubs in Europe, the ones in the UK that we're close to as well. It's about having the lab space to do the work locally, but actually having people on the ground at these more sort of remote locations from our home site, and more in those biohub places as well. And also, most of our clients these days, they want the scientific expertise that can come from a larger organization, but they often are working, certainly with the venture capital companies and the biotech companies, are working on tighter budgets. So they often want some value with low-cost science mixed with this high-value project management and scientific expertise. So we're having to adapt our models for you know, trying to find companies we potentially are interested in working with in lower cost environments. And by that, we don't always, we're not excluding any place in the world, but we're not always thinking India and China. We're thinking about European countries as well, where we can have this work carried out. So yeah, we have to be incredibly flexible and dynamic. The customer is always, you know, key. We try to deliver what they want within the budgets that they have available. Challenges they have is, I guess, in the earlier days when we were more pharma biased, when they were the clients that were coming to us for the work, they tended to have a little bit more budget. The biotech companies, we've had to go leaner, more efficient, more dynamic, more agile. And it's exciting times, actually. It's interesting how the business has to move with what the marketplace needs at any point in time.
That's an interesting point, actually. I hadn't really thought about it, I guess, until that shift from, you know, traditionally being pharma companies being the main clients to now dealing with a plethora of biotech companies with varying degrees of experience in the space they're in, or the molecules or particular things they're doing, particularly if it's in the larger cell and gene therapy, where you've got, you know, is there anybody that's really experienced in cell and gene therapy? You know, so,
no, it's really true. I mean, we're all kind of finding our way through this for sure, especially with these novel modalities. And a lot of these smaller biotech companies really are relying on us to have that expertise, because at least we've seen it for 10 different clients as opposed to them with their one program, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's a lot of similarities between the CRO space and the agencies that are actually reviewing this work. We see across the industry what people are doing because we know what their competitors are working on. We have to hold those secrets close to us also, but we get an appreciation for what all these different companies are doing, and we can share that experience, maybe not the details of it, but that experience with our clients to help them move rapidly too through this process. It's kind of an interesting place to sit and watch the industry as it's growing. It's a great perspective, I think, again, for that breadth of experience. So it's a perfect place to be.
And Miranda, I mean, now that you're part of this sort of huge real estate group, you know, I mean, I guess in some respects, you know, I meet developers who look at life sciences and really their interest is in accommodating the venture capital backed R&D companies that go out and raise $80 or $100 million at a time, and then maybe not as price sensitive, if you like, to the square foot rates, because it's all about being in the location they want to be in, and that's how they operate. But have you sort of noticed with a real estate finance group coming in and taking you over relatively recently, I guess, compared to when you were sort of innovation center driven BioCity? Does that change? Do they see the fact they want to ratchet rents and see richer pickings?
Well, it's really interesting, because if you'd spoken to me about these real investors, you know, 3-4 years ago, I probably would have ran down the road, because obviously, you know, it's about them making fast returns. I think we found, you know, an investor who really gets us really and is really complementary. So, you know, they're fantastic at, you know, finding a site, acquiring sites, raising money to buy those sites. But they're relying on us as the BioCity team that was to bring the expertise in of how you run these sites, how you nurture the companies within these sites, and knowing that, you know, even with, you know, when they get the large funding from the VCs, there's still pretty much cash, you know, strapped for cash. Their investors don't want them to be spending their cash on infrastructure. They want it to be spent on the research. It's the same for, you know, the CROs, obviously, as well, as they tend to grow. You know, with the VC companies, we see that they get a chunk of money, and that means that they take a, you know, they've got it for 3-4 years, so they can quickly plan how much space they get, how many people they take on. With the CROs, it tends to be more ad hoc, depending on the number of projects they get in. And, you know, for obvious reasons, COVID reasons, we've seen actually the growth as being in the CROs over the last 12-18 months. You know, there's just work coming in left, right, and centre for them. But and they have to, you know, social distance, so take on more space. But we're very conscious that this could come down as quickly as it's gone up. So it's my role in finding that balance, but also, you know, getting the right. We want companies to stay with us for many years, to start with us and grow, and even have their own buildings on our sites. So it just doesn't make sense to keep ratcheting up the rent year after year.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I guess I was a bit naughty.
No, I'm hoping our investors are listening, but I really honestly think we have got the right fit of investor, and the new ones that are coming in, you know, who are seeing this space as the sexy space rather than just pure office retail space. I think they understand that they have to be in it for the longer term.
I think it's an interesting point. It is that flexibility. You know, often in a biotech company, you're focused on the next sort of inflection point of, well, we need that clinical data, or the getting into clinical, and then the clinical trial data coming out. From a CRO perspective, I'll start with Karen on this one. You know, how do you build the confidence? Okay, now we've got enough business in the pipeline, if you like, to invest in growing the facility or growing the staff team. How do you get to that inflection?
Interesting. This is our perpetual in our strategy. This is our perpetual conversation point. You've got to try and you have to have multiple strategies, and you have to kind of be one step ahead of where you think the market's going to go. You have to be dynamic with the workforce. I think that every business needs to have its experts, and our clients expect expertise when they come and talk to us. But equally, we have to have some team members who are more cross-trained, more dynamic. We can flex it. It's no longer that you have a chemistry team and a biology team and a DMPK team. There has to be a lot of crosstalk between those departments. And actually, there's quite a lot of skills that are shared between those teams as well, particularly biology and DMPK. So it's about just being flexible and trying to be one step ahead. Our biggest challenge is filling our pipeline and having that visibility on what's next. But actually, we've got a great senior management team who do that exceptionally well. But it occupies a lot of time and takes a lot of planning. But yeah, it is a perpetual challenge, but an interesting one, and one I think as a business we do well at. But it takes behind the scenes quite a lot of effort to do that.
And I guess, I don't know if it's Is it a case where sort of size matters to some degree? You need a critical mass where you can flex like that internally. I know, Jim, you look at this, and even in different sites where you expand, but when you're a smaller CRO and you're thinking, okay, how am I going to scale this?
Yeah,
they don't have the same ability to buffer it.
I definitely think there is a critical mass to it for sure, to be that fluid and that flexible. We've been very lucky. We've grown over the past year, even during all of the craziness of lockdowns, and added in a number of people to really increase our ability to move things around site to site inside of groups. I mean, to Karen's point, there's a lot of overlaps. People that are working with molecular biology might some days find themselves working on a GMP team, and the next time they're working on a non-clinical biodistribution study for gene therapy. It's just, there's a lot of possibilities there. But I do think you're right that there is a point where you have to get to that size before you have a good integrated project management team that can help keep all the trains running on time, and sometimes change tracks occasionally to get them going where they needed. We're, again, very lucky to have that. But I would imagine smaller organizations can't move as much, can't move as easly as we're lucky enough to be able to, and as I'm sure other folks on the call are also.
So, yeah, you're on mute, sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to say, Tony, I think that's where it really works really well for us, having a cluster of these smaller companies all together, because they do work together and collaborate and make referrals with each other. But we are seeing, a lot of them have got very niche expertise, whether it be in DMPK or, profiling, whatever it may be. But we're seeing that we had an acquisition today. So Aurelia has bought Charnwood Molecular so that they can put the chemistry and biology together. So I do think they are coming together as 4 or 5 companies saying, well, we're on the same site and we can do this bit and they can do that bit and they can do that bit. So there is definitely more of that going on with the smaller companies to offer a fuller, more complete services to their customers.
I think maybe it's come into visibility more because of the pandemic and everybody pitching in to want to find a solution. But I guess it sort of surprised some that I've spoken to how much CROs collaborate with each other. There's not all out and out competition. They do cross refer and collaborate, probably to get that flexibility when they're not big enough to do it on their own as well. But I guess, is that a trend? Is that something that's changing over time? Are they more collaborative, or the larger ones become more acquisitive and they just buy them up if they think they're worth collaborating with them? Well, why would we outsource to them when we can just buy them?
There's definitely been a lot of sort of gobbling up of smaller companies by larger companies. We've seen a good bit of that lately. I mean, I know personally, I work with a lot of people across industry, both on the innovator side and in the CRO side, and industry groups. We're on panels together, things like this, and other things at scientific meetings, and working on white papers together. So I do think it's actually very collaborative. There seems to be more than enough work to go around for all of us to stay quite busy and growing. So I do think it's a little more open than it used to be, at least my perception of it, for sure.
It is, and Charles River is one of those big companies that's is very acquisition driven. But even still, we collaborate outside of our areas of expertise. We have lots of alliances with companies where we build that sort of strategic partnership just through business contracts rather than through acquisition, to work together. There's lots of fields we're working in with other partners at the moment, and they just strengthen the offering that we can bring to clients. What we find is that certainly some of the more smaller organisations that do have just the bare bones staff with no wet science ongoing. They have fantastic ideas. They know the directions their projects want to go. But our role is to make sure that they don't use that very hard sort of, they've spent a lot of effort finding this money in from the different sort of investment companies. We don't want them spending their time doing admin. We're quite happy to find ways of doing that for them, to help with communication, to help with finding the right experiments to solve challenges. They will of course contribute to that, but that's the biggest challenge, sort of change I've seen over the years. CROs have gone from being sort of people directing what you do to it being a lot more collaborative and us helping those companies do it in a streamlined way. So hopefully they see it that way, but that's definitely our vision, that's what the CROs are trying to do, is that end-to-end drug discovery as efficiently and as smoothly as possibly can be.
Which I think is kind of an interesting point again, which comes back to when I see some of the sort of earlier stage startup CROs, and by working with the already larger players, how much that mentoring can help. You know, it's kind of things to look out for. You know, this cohort of customers, be really careful with. You know, because you just learn these things through experience if you start to see the red flags early. You know, and I think there's that side, and I guess that comes back to your point, Miranda, about how important the clustering is, of having this range of CROs and diversity there, so you can learn from each other and support each other as well. Which, you know, I think all the locations here from, you know, North Carolina or UK and both elements there, we're fortunate to have those clusters in a sense that they're already there. It must be very difficult to create it from scratch if you're out in the wilderness somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think incubators and accelerators, you know, can really help the CROs succeed with that, you know, by providing mentorship, guidance, training, strategy, and sometimes even funding. I know ourselves, you know, we have an intensive business accelerator program specifically for life science entrepreneurs, and we do get CROs joining, and we base that all on the, you know, lean startup methodology of evidence entrepreneurship, where they, you know, learn to use the tools to identify gaps in the business and evaluate risks and create business models, etc. But yeah, it's tough. And talking about, you know, the diversity piece, I do think that is something that we do have to look at in the sector. As I say, we've got really experienced people coming from pharma, but I also do feel that we've got, dare I say it, too many grey hairs, no hairs in the sector, and we need those to be, you know, showing the next generation how to do things, how to do some problem solving, maybe how we, you know, bring some women leaders and people of different races, cultural backgrounds into the sector to lead some of these companies, so we have more diverse thinking, I would say.
Well, I guess, I suppose you already see, I mean, I know I'm more familiar with Charles River than with bioagilitics, but it's, you know, that sort of seems to be a compelling societal wave that we need to get better at, and life sciences isn't immune to what goes on in society. You know, but I guess it leads me to, I suppose, a question is of helping that evolution of the sector, if you like, and the scaling of it. You know, what role does government play in shaping the CRO part of our sector? I mean, the sector generally, it's had huge impacts, good and bad, in the past. I guess we can look back on it, it wasn't helpful. And some things have been. But when you look at the CRO space, so what role does the government play in that? I don't know. I'll throw it to you, Karen, first.
I mean, it has a large role to play. So as a business, we can control the internal factors. You know, that as a business, that's our responsibility. Sometimes some external factors are changed, which have quite a big effect on us, and there's been a few in the past couple of years. So things like the changes to the cannabinoids legislation in the UK. You know, at the time, pharma companies were consulted, CROs were not. It'd be much better to have, and it's changing, and I appreciate it's changing, but this affects the CROs probably to a greater extent because we're collaborating more, we're shipping across territories and boundaries. It adds charges to our clients, which they don't like it, but we don't like that they've got extra charges. We want them to spend their money on research and taking drugs forward. So there's been things like that, import and export changes due to Brexit. That's been this year's big challenge. You know, importer of records is causing us quite a lot of admin headache at the moment. So it's just making sure that the government has that understanding that CROs do get some, you know, there are some challenges for CROs based on their decisions, and including them in that consultation would be very much welcomed. As I said, it is changing. And then we also have, you know, maybe there's some ways we've found over the past year, we have a large European workforce, and that appears to be a little more challenging to get mainland European staff into the UK at the moment. So all of these things aren't showstoppers, but they're certainly making life a little more challenging at the moment. So certainly the UK government and could help with some of those areas for us.
And Jim, from a kind of US lens, so I know you've had major changes in administration, I guess, over the last year or so in many guises, but
So I agree, I think, with Karen also that you know, we're starting to get a seat at the table and be part of those discussions. You know, you find on a lot of these advisory boards and panel discussions, kind of the usual players from the largest pharma companies that have been part of it, whereas we not only have their perspective, but also the small 5-person startup company that's relying on us. And we work globally, we work in a lot of different situations, both small and large, so we have an interesting perspective, and I think they're starting to see that. You know, again, I sound a bit like a broken record, but there's just an amazing breadth of experience in the CRO that really isn't tied to one particular company becoming the winner. We're kind of tied to all boats rising in this case and wanting everyone to succeed. So we really do have a lot to bring to the table, and I think it's starting to get recognized here. So we're, again, very lucky to see some headway into some of those discussions here in the US.
And Miranda, do you think it's kind of recognized when you look at the UK sort of government strategies, and I don't know how many life science strategies we've had over the last few years, 1 or 2 or 3. But it's, you know, do you think CROs get a big enough voice in some of that?
No, and I know we've had this conversation in the past, Tony, but, you know, if we look at the pandemic, you know, that's shone a spotlight on the value of life sciences sector and the role UK life sciences sector has to play on a global scale as a whole. So I do feel there's an opportunity for government to promote the fantastic things going on right across the sector and the country, but also the importance, the role of CROs have played in this. You know, they're a critical part of the pharma industry. And as I say, I feel that you know, providing the backbone for clinical trials, you know, how important those have been over the last few months. So I think there's much more to do promoting and supporting them. But I also think if you look from a UK perspective, there's a real opportunity at the moment with the government's levelling up agenda, you know, building that capacity, whether it's infrastructure for these companies or skills right across the country can only be a good thing. And there I'm not talking about them, you know, displacing stuff from the golden triangle that we always tend to hear about, but, you know, having the capacity to pursue excellence wherever it's located in the country. And, you know, whether that's in, I don't know, genomics in Wales or AI in the north or manufacturing in the Midlands. Whatever we do to, bring these clusters together will be good for, the life sciences industry as a whole, which then would have a kind of knock-on effect for the CROs, to bring investment from home and abroad.
But it sort of always feels to me sometimes it's, I don't get involved in the policy side of it too often, but when you read and then you listen to it, kind of feels sometimes the governments are so keen to throw money at a company or a project or a particular area. But actually what you really need them to sort out is the capacity for those locations to allow scale. Does the infrastructure of the digital infrastructure and the drainage and water handling, all those sort of practical things you need before you can put a life sciences building anywhere. Sometimes they don't sort the infrastructure out, so it doesn't really matter what you do with a company if your location's not ready for it. And that's something I guess I've noticed, I suppose, a while back with certainly around the Massachusetts side when the governor created their fund. A lot of the funding they spent went on getting places outside of Cambridge and Boston kind of capacity ready in a sense, or able to build. I know, Jim, if you've been much closer to it than me.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there, physically, it's almost hard to picture putting more people into Cambridge at the moment, quite honestly. It's been, a long time since we were all down there, thanks to COVID, but it is quite filled, and there's an enormous amount of space outside of the loop where this could be expanded into, and there's been a huge effort. But I do think there's still this strong interest in the Boston area around people being co-located with the universities and the small startups and all of these elements to have sort of that intertwined connection between companies and CROs and universities, sort of feeding the line of people that are coming into the companies. So they're just going to have to keep building the buildings taller, I think, to get folks in there. It's the only way.
The thing is, when you're over in sort of Cambridge, UK, and the landscape here is sufficiently flat that any building of any height of any sort you can see for miles. The view's fantastic. Exactly, it's very flat. I mean, I'm conscious we've talked about lots of things really, but if you looked at it now and you had your kind of magic lamp and the genie pops out and you could look at the CROs, okay, that would be the wish I would grant to the CROs. What would be that one thing you would do for them? First, I'll start with Miranda, and then we'll give you your wish first, which is is it on mute?
Sorry, I keep doing that, don't I? I think for me, it'd be growth for the sector as a whole is a really a big thing for startups and CROs to be successful in our sector. So I think if I had a magic lamp, it'd be to give people, I don't know, provide them with the leadership skills, I think, to be able to inspire and motivate and grow their own companies as well as the companies around them for the good of the whole. So yeah, I think it'd be more leadership skills to create more entrepreneurial startups, but entrepreneurial scalers, serial scalers.
Jim.
I think what I would love to do is watch our staff grow and expand their experience as much as possible. The way that our capacity increases, I think, is by having more people at the table, adding scientific knowledge, leadership skills for sure. Again, experience. I wish everyone, even if they were just coming out of their PhD program, immediately had 15 years worth of drug development experience, just so that they could all sort of weigh in and be part of it. It's the way we solve problems best, is to have more people part of the discussion. So I guess that's my magic wand. Everyone gets an immediate 20 years of drug development experience.
That's good. Karen.
So I'm going to be cheeky and say my magic lantern would be to actually create a crystal ball. So and I mean that for multiple ways. So exactly as was been described by Miranda and Jim, it's about the sector can grow enormously and is growing enormously, but it can grow more aggressively if we have a greater understanding of the growth we need to, because the CRO is dependent on the business coming in, and then that dictates what your head count is. It dictates what science you need within the business to be able to deliver for your clients. And our biggest challenge is that sometimes we have things thrown at us, like, just the things falling out of clinical trials in a similar area to other clients working in. COVID has thrown all kinds of challenges at us. And if we had that crystal ball, our growth strategy could be planned today for a long time in the future. But being a CRO, we sometimes have things that are thrown at us that cause deviations from that growth strategy that we have. So that's why I think the crystal ball is just to have that visibility on where the future's taking us.
So I'm conscious we've got a few minutes left of our session, so I'll make full use of your insights while I'm here, if I may. I'm just thinking that we've sort of touched upon it. You can't have a conversation really without starting to reflect on the fact we've had COVID-19 and so much disruption, seen the best of some things and probably the worst of some too. But what do you think the biggest impact of COVID-19 has been on the CRO space? If I come to Karen, because I'll let you go first this time. Give me that.
No, to me, it's been positives. I mean, we can always focus on some of the challenges we've had, but we're coming through the other side of that now. To me, there's been huge positives with COVID. And for us at Charles River, it's been about that flexibility. We actually spent a lot of time in the office, traveling to and from meetings. The flexibility we have within the business now is incredible. And that's really regarded by the staff as well. And it's actually made us more productive. So I will look at the positives, and it is the turn the challenge into that positive and just being able to work flexibly. And also, through COVID, we had a lot of clients who closed their facilities. They were in different geographical locations in the world with different legislation that dictated what they could and couldn't do. Through lots of careful planning, we stayed open throughout, and that was very well received by some of our clients.
So, Jim, what do you think is?
Yeah, it's the online conferencing, the fact that we've all become so good at virtual meetings. We've cut down on the need for people to be face to face. We can be on calls with our colleagues at 3, 5, 10 different sites, whatever it is. Just efficiently better at connecting with our clients, connecting with our teams. There was a pretty good sized population of people that said these things always have to happen face to face. And I think we learned through a bit of forced evolution that it doesn't have to happen that way, that we can actually do it this way. And I hope we stick with this part of it. It'll get back to that problem in Cambridge of having to build the buildings too tall. People can stay home if they need to. So
indeed,
this has been a huge plus, I think.
Miranda.
I've got to say, I'm just so impressed with the sheer resilience of the small startups throughout this. All our companies remained open throughout. They very quickly, changed protocols. They made sure their staff was safe. They put in different working patterns which may stay in the future. I just think it was fantastic. Some of them had to pivot their business. Some of them, you know, overnight changed strategy, and some started to you know, work on COVID related things. And I just thought that just shows, you know, the agility of the sector. You know, anything can be thrown at them and they'll get through it. And I think at the end of this, by the end of this, we'll have much stronger companies actually.
Well, all three of you, and I'm conscious I have used up all of the insights I can beg, steal, or borrow for now. But thank you for sharing what you have. I think there was so much food for thought there. If I was thinking about, do I want to move into the CRO space as an employer, or want to start a CRO, and how they scale and some of the barriers. I think finishing on the positives of what we take away from what's been a pretty challenging year all round in many ways. But I think that resilience and collaboration and intellectual exchange at scale and remotely, I think has been a positive to look back on and say, you know what, we can do this. And I think it's probably made people bring back a bit of the humanness to doing business, where you're now not just seeing someone in a work environment, you've seen them with the kids in the background and the dogs giving next door's cats a lesson on where they should be, and all these things happening, and we've sort of rekindled, yeah, you know, and just rekindling the people side of doing business, and innovation happens through people, I think, and that's where success comes from, and that's where scale comes from. You know,
you learn the quick mute when the postman comes when you've got dogs. That's a reality of life.
I think from those, I'm sure there are now many more fully aware postmen, and the least postman's challenges are more now visible to many more people, I think, which is, but thank you for your time. It's been a real pleasure hosting you on this one. And I hope to see you soon. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.